Greetings. Thank you for tuning in. Um, this is Jesse Henshaw, uh, and, uh, and my talk is on a new language of history. Not only has the old one become very worn out, but also, as in nature, the end of growth for living organisms is normally either birth or death. And humanity has not yet considered those possibilities. Uh, and this is an edit of a presentation first given to the ISSS meeting in Cyprus on June 25, re-recorded August 24 now. And the to, to preface the talk, I hope to be offering a tender but accurate view of humanity's tragically heroic, repeated erasures of its own history, often both not very truthful and willfully deceitful. We did evolve as storytellers, yes, but then learned to tell ever bigger untruthful stories. Yet every growth system in nature starts somewhat that way. Did we just miss a turn or confuse our amazing stories with material realities? In any case, our leading civilizations have gone through growth to their own collapse, turning their cultures into long dark ages again and again. So maybe we only need to learn the real stories? I hope so. In our lives, we're like nature, seeking harmonious centers and connections, creating worlds of peace to live in. To survive, we also sharpen tools, methods, and relationships, taking growing advantage of others. It's a natural mortal conflict, seemingly inherited from the first managed economy in Mesopotamia, trying to grow without limit, only to collapse in total confusion. Babel. So this is an overview of the long now of human history, since modern human history, I should say, repeatedly getting carried away, growth to collapse from Babel to us. Our Western civilizations got stuck in that recurring pattern of growth to total collapse and long dark age of cultured death. It's a phase that we can outgrow if we pay attention to how it develops, seeming to leave only our family and local cultures for recovery as the regional or societal wisdom dies almost completely. It might have been avoided, too, if civilization was seen as an organism, as part of nature, and needing to grow up, and survive and thrive like any other. But we presently have this question of whether the Dark Age to come from our current collapse, which some see developing already, will create a Dark Age of more lasting and more harmful character than before. We're so close to destabilizing Earth systems. Long before we learned to write, people created several wonderful, creative, advanced civilizations. Ours is the latest edition, originating in the Middle East, all of which have risen dramatically as we have, but then to collapse at their peaks, erasing their societal cultures, as may be happening to us already, given the very similar extreme practices and symptoms we're experiencing. We all feel the catastrophic threat and how helpless we are, too. We'll feel better if we study what's really happening. The first grow to collapse economy was very special, joining two late Stone Age cultures in the northern and southern Levant in response to a climate change. The true cradle of Western civilization, or about 11,000 years ago, before writing and seemingly also before names. At first, we have 4,000 years of informal building on connecting the differing skills of the two cultures of the region. Then they began perfecting their arts and trades as an economy. That then led to maximizing profits, though, to grow their growing, like we do. That economy inexplicably collapsed at its peak of success, called Babel, in the Bible, and the fifth such experiment, us, is doing much the same thing, not having learned from experience since. Where did I learn about it? I started to learn about this difference between nature and our ideas growing up in a small upstate New York college town, Hamilton, where the kids called Secret Valley, for everything seemed to work. Relieved World War II was over. My parents, grand and great-grands, were accomplished scientists, educators, builders, and organizers, though I was not educated as such, just left to my own curiosity, discovering my big family later in life, with my ability to notice patterns. My dad was the chair of the physics department. His best faculty friend, Ken Boulding, stayed in touch, the faculty moms taking care of Ken's mom while he traveled, and somehow I picked up the patterns from how he and my dad related. As a college freshman, I then noticed a very odd thing about how equations were made. Physics discards the data from starting and ending change that's unexplained, finding later it was often the lively processes of system formation that were being ignored and left out of the story. So I didn't go on in physics, but into architecture at Penn, taking interest in what makes life lively, learning from Louis Kahn and others that design is to serve the living, not really to control them. I also studied design pattern languages, how processes of system formation worked, new forms of organization built by innovation, then maturation. You see it in the S-curves of progress for design efforts or most anything else, as well as in natural transformations. It was in the 70s, after graduation from architecture school, that I traveled to visit friends, ending up in Denver doing carpentry and made a portable lab to study microclimate design. I found, one, it was growth that made life lively. And growth also produced the continuity of change in nature. And three, not being paid for it. Physics had never studied that. But I lost my house, got sick, went back home, having to restart my career after a wonderful, long exploration leading to pretty serious failure. So while working my way up in the New York architecture offices, I learned the craft and worked on a new physics of natural system design. I developed the Curve software for restoring the lively shapes of nature changing over time. It puts back into the picture what physics took out, the formative processes of natural relationships people can still learn from. Here on the left is the collapse of the crack epidemic in New York that brought peace to the city after the great flare-up of minority culture violence that ensued on the liberation of the minorities in the 60s and 50s and 60s, and coming to peace with itself finally. It had to do with hip hop, the, the latter. On the right is a drawing of a recording of the change from one little plankton species to another, shown in the picture. First starting to grow in size slowly, revolve in size slowly, and then collapsing a bit, and then shooting up and collapsing, shooting up and collapsing and shooting up, and leveling off as its transition from one species to another. This is happening all the time in our lives, and we don't notice it, partly because we make up our own ideas and we're not really paying attention. All right, so what if we learned nature's language? This is nature's integral, the S-curve that has different functional parts. It's an organizational process, not a mathematical one, but revealed by measurement of the organizational rates of change. And in this case, germination is a spark that, down here, this little G, that ignites the growth process A, the cycle of developing ever faster, that every new emerging system has to go through to begin its development. And then there's B, the homing in on the new state at the end, a change in direction in the middle, both essential for creating new systems or new lives or new organizations, new friendships, all sorts of things. But then there's a trap for humans In nature, the S-curves of change come from working relationships holding the change together. So replacing that with math removes our awareness of what is physically happening. It's a trap that took the world by storm. We ended up designing science for taking power over nature with a tool that projected boundless growth as a trusted solution and that had no reference to the organizations of relationships that were involved. So it offered great solutions with no warnings of multiplying world crises and dark ages after collapse. The natural solutions are that we can get good at noticing change and learning to respond. If you hear a knock at the door, can you tell who's knocking before you answer it? Usually you can, just from the knock. Studying our first managed economy, 8,000 to 5,000 years ago, profoundly collapsing from rules for growing success. And human shortcuts cause part of it. We don't like changing rules, confusing us when either our own or nature's change. So we stick with our shortcuts and ignore the change going on around us. How people change is with effectively is with care. Care and help with seeing the advantages of all working together to respond to. So where I first noticed all this was in a physics lab in college in my freshman year. This is a picture of the building, and the lab was in the basement. And I noticed something wrong with our translation of nature into equations in 1964. As I already knew some of the territory of physics, in the first physics lab, I made jokes about it, asking why equations are showing us nature as starting and stopping in midair without any process. How to make a formula? Well, you take a ball, a strobe light, to make a flashing light in the dark, photographed to measure the distances between the dots and do the math. Then over time, however, I discovered the evidence that it was very long ago that physics got the wrong formula. Nothing wrong with the math, but with the story. Why care about the math and ignore the story? A ping pong ball tossed from one end of a table to the other, lit by a strobe light, is equal to a times x to the second power plus b times x plus c. That's all the math says. Says nothing about what's happening around you. Doesn't the event in context matter too? So what is the math saying with such great precision? Everything else about it that seems to matter is being very left out. What about the tossing and catching? The self-organizing systems that energize the ball to make it take off and land and reel. Precision says control, but events come from bursts of growth we can't model. Is science not what we thought for pointing to clear paths ahead? not doing that job at all, if it leaves out the whole context in which change is taking place and the precision that encourages users to misinterpret it, hiding what nature needs to work by itself? In reality, nature creates worlds of richly organized centers, sharing connections with others to work as wholes, all omitted in the science of equations, particularly those for economics. But who was it that decided to leave out all the contexts and represent nature with formulas? It was the first scientist, Thales of Miletus, a noted 600 BC Greek businessman, a ship's captain, trader, and intellect, having searched ancient libraries as he traveled to find the secret formulas of antiquity on how to grow wealth without work, pushing nature beyond its limits and often to civilization collapse, incidentally. The greatest turning point in human history was being fooled by that solution. Nature was turned into numbers for profit. Sharp put-downs of nature religion silenced people studying the living behavior of systems around us. And nature made into abstract numbers without context. Of course, it went back much further in history, too. 200,000 years ago, sapiens, our most recent prior species, were concentrated in Kenya and in South African homelands, preceded by a million-year spread of Homo erectus along Africa's east coast. You can see in the diagram the area of hominid spread before the bottleneck 900,000 years ago, and the numbers on the chart showing the thousands of years ago of each spread of human species. And if you look at the Africa numbers, there actually is an error. The oldest one should have been in South Africa, and which then contributed to the Kenya location. So we should switch the date numbers from 200 and 150,000 years ago to be more accurate. Now here is the most astounding of our evolutionary traumas. On the left, a diagram of the inheritances of Homo erectus that had divided into several species by the time of 900,000 years ago, when there was a dramatic narrowing of the population. As you see in the bottleneck on the right, the thousands of members of the human population dropped to about 120 individuals at I think 900 yeah, BC. Um, and if you look at the diagram on the left, you see this little gap. This knife edges cutting off all of humanity. Uh, a you know a, a, a 200 to 1 reduction in population or more, uh, and uh, and then um, going back to evolution of diversification, again giving us the variety of different Homo species that we are familiar with. So we have, this is just here as evidence of pretty clear evidence anyway, of humans getting carried away mentally, our minds getting fixated on something and going beyond all reasonable limits uh, in following through, um, not knowing where it would go. And, and it gave us a species willing and able to destroy an entire planet. It's the sad point. This is where that happened. This is the Homo sapiens that we're happy to destroy the natural world, not noticing that we depend on it, which is our state of affairs now. So this is a repetition of the first graph, showing the same thing. Uh, you know, the early part of the two cultures in the Levant getting together and matching their talents, and then developing, and then somebody getting involved to accelerate that to the point of it collapsed. And similarly for the Bronze Age, a very collaborative period, and then somebody accelerating it till it collapsed. And then the same with Greece. Um, uh, very collaborative. Greece, the classical Greek uh, 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 democratic society, wonderfully productive, wonderfully intellectually insightful, and but got caught in the same trap. So it's a very easy trap to fall into, is one of the lessons here, and for pretty good reason, but also kind of disappointing that we didn't notice before. And then this one is for Rome, that Rome also began with a very idealistic democracy, if anybody doesn't know that. And but it was then driven to collapse um, uh, by multiplying solutions that ended up multiplying their problems. But what we do. And so, and then the last one is the peak and fall haven't happened yet. We're somewhere in the middle of this rise, but I'm assuming that it's going to collapse if we don't change to a a more natural stabilization, uh, learning from nature how to do it. So, decoding the real stories. How nature works by itself is animated by self-organized energy systems, not math. Growth is the system formation process that builds and fits systems together in their contexts. That formative activity is what S-curves are good evidence of. The working material and organizational parts mine their contexts and adaptable resources to remake anew from nature's vast supply of adaptable old parts and patterns. solutions. The main cipher for following such happenings, these are the activity of the S curve going from A to B and to stabilization as a new form of life is called a happening. And of course, happenings are of a great variety, um, uh, of short period things as well. But the changes of state that occur with short periods of change is the focus. Takeoffs and landings. Now, the first climate change has something to do with this. Um, those two first cultures in the northern and southern Levant um, uh, was were met with a climate change in about 12,000 BC that dropped uh, sharply, um, dropped the temperature sharply, and they were at that time then ready to collaborate. And as it warmed up, they improved their collaboration. Uh, so it was, but it might not have happened without the shock of a cold snap, uh, forcing them to work together to solve their habitation problems. As you'll see, the solutions are wonderful solutions. Um, uh, the signs of things taking hold as lasting system formation, noticing and confirming regular progressions of the nonlinear kind, more set patterns forming, a signal of both momentum and rigidity, the signal of system formation as a warning of steering challenges ahead. So, the creative bursts of Babel in the Bronze Age. The first emergence of modern civilization was a burst of creative collaboration between neighboring late Stone Age Middle Eastern cultures, a big chill, but 12,000 years ago, with the younger Dryas global environment change. Um, and the Natufian cultures of the northern and southern Levant were motivated to make better homes. A burst of increasing organized creativity joining the two highly creative PPN, pre-pottery Neolithic, cultures. The southern Levantine PPN settled heavily in the Jordan River Valley with the iconic sites like Jericho and Tel es Sultan, masters of early perennial water management, alluvial architecture, pioneering round mud brick homes, the first experimental large-scale harvesting of wild grains. The northern Mesopotamian Anatolian PPM settled the hilltops of Upper Mesopotamia, including the Göbekli Tepe and hilltop near the Taztepler sites. The achieved extraordinary social organization, making monumental megalith architecture and deep symbolic artistic and ritual expression, carving famous T-shaped stone pillars. So here's the the state of the development in the between the northern and southern culture. The northern one, the engineers, and the southern one, the farmers and accountants. Um, the northern one, uh, the engineers and wild uh, animal herding uh, uh, community, that neither of which had names, because those hadn't been developed yet in human culture. The northern culture of stone engineers thrived on rangeland, harvesting of wild grains and migrating herds of wild animals. The Jordan Valley farmers invented accounting, the first written language to organize trade and economic accounts. It spread and multiplied, leading to collapse in Mesopotamia, where the cities developed, the new cities developed, and where the the attempt to perfect growth to infinity developed and failed again and again. The scribes didn't see it coming, not knowing their plan to stabilize growth would destabilize it too. So one city-state after another tried and didn't fix the problem. That the solutions caused the fragility of systems managed for endless growth. So it kept being passed on from one civilization to the next. Most stories describe Babel as a building tower collapse, but the stories of events better fit reading it as a collapse of their languages in a tower of confusion. Our first managed economy, growing to collapse, from the systems becoming unaccountable, like ours are today. Most city-states were trying to perfect growth to infinity, but unavoidable errors in planning caused its language to lose meaning instead. Biblical records say Abram and his family left Ur around 1890 BC, 3,600 years after the collapse of Babel, moving to the Euphrates headwaters near where Göbekli Tepe, its habitation was, about 700 years before the Bronze Age collapse. Just to put that's the one of the several links between the two cultures. That um, uh, the collapse in Babel, in the Tigris and Euphrates um, delta, um, and uh, uh, and then the feedback through the system um, of, of failure to learn from that, except that it developed an occupation in Egypt. So there was the management error, numbers blind to limits, that collapsed Babel about 5500 BC. Then the first kingdom of Egypt, about 3100 BC, where seasonal farming to alternate pyramid building in the spring when flood waters helped move the stones and enriched the soil for farming to follow. Learning from experience, weren't bothered by the collapse syndrome of the other cultures. Abram moved to the Euphrates headwaters near Göbekli Tepe in 1890 BCE. That's over here, these two dots. And then the Bronze Age began about 2,400 years after Babel collapsed and prospered for 1,400 more before developing extraordinary prosperity, a multicultural organization of artistic and productive relationships, much like ours, till much of the same kind of collapse from unmanageable success happened again. The Bronze Age collapse was particularly dramatic, with the centers of most of the productive city-states all destroyed from 1220 BC to 1130 BC, as if from societal betrayal. Described in some detail in Eric Klein's 1177 BC, what really happened remains unclear. So each of our great civilizations could have perfected their sustainable designs to prosper far longer. Though, as with the growth-maximizing math popularized by Thales, it seems not really a cultural blindness at fault, but a cognitive one, believing what you see is all that matters, and math stripped all of the information about what you interact with in your contexts. So it's an accident that was bound to happen in the growing period from Stone Age to modern minds, if the modern minds do it and survive. Welcome back to the home base. This is the 2026 International Society of System Sciences Cyprus meeting presentation. Have we done our job? For references, see this link. There's also a page following this of links. Have we elevated system science, addressed humanity's greatest challenges, seen a clear vision for the long path for humanity ahead? Had a good time? I hope so. If you're around after closing on Friday, come to the Radisson Beach Hotel. I had reservations there for after the meeting. So from here on, it's time to find real words again. Words that refer to things that everybody can independently observe and interpret on their own. Here's the last page. Take a picture of this to record the reference links, and thank you very much for watching my talk.